presentation, right? All right, we are going to do a tree tour, a virtual tree tour of Fort Tryon Park. And when you're standing at the Margaret Corbin traffic circle, looking north, the first group of trees you see are these beautiful London planes. There's a semicircle of them around the drive there. And here's a picture of them after a snowfall, looking into the heather garden. They're enormously tall trees, and they're long-lived, and they're really good for urban areas. Here's one when you first walk in, on the left is an enormous London plane tree. But they were actually created by the gardener to King Charles I, John Tradescant. And he and his father, so this is John the Younger, he and his father, John Tradescant the Elder, worked for King Charles and other royalty in England. And they traveled in the 1600s, they traveled to this country and collected tree seeds and all kinds of flowering plants and brought them back to London. And so he brought the American sycamore, magnolia, tulip tree, bald cypress, and many other trees back to England, where of course they're not native. And he planted them in the royal garden. And so this is what the American sycamore leaf looks like. He planted them next to the European sycamore, and they hybridized, and they created a baby, which he named the London plane tree. The leaves are very similar to the American sycamore, and I just discovered this, and this will help all of us. The American sycamore leaf has these ears, which the London plane tree leaf does not have. When Robert Moses was the Parks Commissioner, so in the 1930s, he planted thousands of London plane trees in all the boroughs because they are just the best tree for absorbing pollutants. The leaf blade is wide, it's thin. The trees are very tall, have a huge canopy, so they throw a lot of shade in the summer, and they're beautiful looking. The bark exfoliates, and when our son, who's now in his 40s, was a little boy, he called it the G.I. Joe tree. I'm sorry, I don't know what's wrong with my voice. Because it looks like it's camouflaged. And during the growing season, when the tree grows in girth, these plates pop off, and you can find them all around the tree. It looks messy, but it's a sign that the tree is growing. Many birds build their nests in the London plane. So this is a male Baltimore oriole feeding his babies. So the Oriole Nest is a woven basket. And this is a picture I took of a baby red-tailed hawk in a London plane tree. This was next to the boat basin where I lived for many years. And here is a purple finch eating the seed of a London plane tree. When you cross over, the first trees to greet you are holly trees. And holly trees are dioecious. So there's a male tree and there's a female tree. You don't have male and female flowers on the same trees. You have them on separate trees. Dioecious means two houses. So let's look. This is the male. He's on the right. These are his flowers. They're called staminate flowers because they have stamens and anthers that produce pollen, but they have no ovary. On the left is the female holly tree, and these are her flowers. And you can see the ovary well, let me go back. These are false stamens. They produce no anthers and no pollen. And the female flowers are what produces the berries. The berries are loved by birds. So here's a cedar waxwing, and we do have cedar waxwings in the park, small flocks of them that feed on insects in the summer and all kinds of berries in the winter that the Fort Tryon trees provide them. And so in between, next to the hollies, is an enormous dawn redwood tree. The dawn redwood is considered a living fossil because it existed before the ages of glaciation. It existed when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. And they thought, so over 50 million years ago, they thought it had become extinct because of the glaciers. But then in the 1940s, they found it growing in temples in China and Korea and Japan. And they started bringing the seeds back to this country in the 1940s. And now you kind of find them growing everywhere. In fact, they planted many of them down at the World Trade Center in honor of the people who died there. But the dawn redwood is such an interesting tree because it's called a deciduous conifer. It's a needle leaf tree, beautiful, soft needles, but in the winter, they fall off. It's very much like our bald cypress, which is also a deciduous conifer. It has needle leaves that fall off before winter. It produces cones that look like this when they're immature, and then look like that when they fall to the ground. And I've seen sparrows and starlings eating the seeds of these while they're on the ground. And next to the dawn redwood is a couple of beautiful flowering dogwoods, our native dogwood. There's one at the north end of the Heather Garden, kind of right in front of this cherry tree. And these are the flower buds that you can see throughout the winter, and they're getting ready to open in the spring. They look like little onions, and the coverings of them are bracts. And so when you look at a dogwood flower, most people think these are the petals, but these are bracts, and they protect the buds. These are the real flowers. If you look closely, you can see individual flowers that have just opened. And the bracts on the flowering dogwood, on our native dogwood, have this notch at the edge of each bract. These flowers are what produce the fruit. And the fruit is very high in protein and fat. And in order for the tree to attract birds in the autumn, to attract migrating birds and birds flying over, they're one of the first trees to have their leaves turn red. And that the ornithologists call flagging, because it's letting the birds know they can come down and they'll find fruit. And oh boy, look at all the birds that eat this fruit. Some of them are migrating birds like the pine warbler and the yellow rump warbler, the northern flicker, these and yellow-bellied sapsucker. These two are woodpeckers. They migrate, but we have year-round birds here too. We have American robins that feed on dogwood berries, and catbirds, downy woodpeckers, tufted titmice, mockingbirds, northern cardinals, and juncos, and many other birds eat these berries. It's also the host plant for the blue azure butterfly, who lays her eggs on the flower buds. And the caterpillars actually eat the flower buds, and they are protected by ants. The caterpillars secrete this honeydew, this sugary sweet liquid, and the ants feed on that, but they also protect the caterpillars from any birds that might come down and eat them. And then we have a different kind of dogwood at the northern end of the Heather Garden, kind of in the northeast corner here. And that's a kusa dogwood. So kusa means dogwood in Japanese. And you can see they look different. They have this very pointy end to their bract instead of that rounded notched end. And their flowers look different, and their flowers produce this fruit that contains lots of berries that are fused together. Here you can see. And these are very sweet and are edible for humans, and of course also for birds and squirrels and all kinds of animals. This is a blue-throated warbler, which we have in the park in the spring. So in the heather garden, you'll see some plants that are flowering now, and these are witch hazel plants, and they flower in the winter. Some of them have these yellow petals, some of them have orange petals, and they're pollinated by a moth. So here you see a moth resting on the branch with snow all around it. They're pollinated by the owlet moth, which is a moth that's active during the winter. And to stay warm, they shake their thoracic muscles and wing muscles, and and they create body heat that way. I'm going to talk about the yews next. So I love this picture. So we have lots of different kinds of yew trees in the park. So there's some yews here and yews all along here. They're shrubs, low shrubs, and they're evergreen, and they're conifers, cone bearing. So, and they are like the holly, they're dioecious. So this is a male yew with pollen cones. Here's one down by the Billings lawn. And the gardener, John Kelly, he loves the shape of these trees. So he makes sure there are no branches low down so we can look at the beautiful trunk. And this is the female cone. And the female cone produces this covering called an aril. Every part of the yew tree is poisonous except for the aril. And the arils are eaten by so many different birds and of course squirrels. Here's a little house sparrow, but I've seen cardinals and blue jays and mockingbirds eating these too. This is a beautiful star magnolia. That's an early bloomer. I love this picture. You see this fellow is reading. He's got his dog there who's looking over the stone wall. In the winter, you'll see the buds of the magnolia. The large buds are flower buds and the small buds are leaf buds. And they're covered in like a sweater, a furry sweater to protect them from snow and winter's winds. This is a very ancient flower. It's one of the first angiosperms to evolve. And the center of the flower looks very cone-like. When they evolved, there were no butterflies or bees or flies, but there were beetles, and they are still pollinated by beetles. And if you look closely, you can see beetle here and here and here and here and here. And this is the fruit that they produce, very cone-like. And these are the seeds, and they're beautiful red seeds that are eaten by many birds, including this red-bellied woodpecker. So a little further north from the magnolia is a hawthorn. This picture shows it filled with berries, but first it flowers. And it flowers in April, late April, early May, and pollinators love it. It's just covered by native bees and bumblebees and honeybees, carpenter bees. And those flowers produce the berries that are a favorite of birds. The Cedar Wax Ring, our great gorgeous berry lover, and the robin and mockingbirds. So, you know, when you walk in the park and you see a tree with berries, stay for a while and you'll see what birds come to it. Also, the cardinals, male and female cardinals, love the hawberries. Another ornamental fruit-producing tree is our crabapple. Beautiful flowers, and the crabapples are eaten by all kinds of birds. Here's a crow and a starling. So here's that crabapple, and here is the Kwanzan cherry, which is a spectacularly beautiful tree when it blossoms. It's named for the Kwanzan area in China, Kwanzan Mountains, but it's grown for its beauty. It's purely ornamental. It does not produce fruit. From what I've read, it produces hardly any pollen or nectar. So the purpose it serves is that it's just so beautiful. And we have them all over the park. These are two of my favorite down in the lower park. The mighty elm, the American elm. And Jennifer's raising money for the park in order to inoculate the elms, which is very expensive, but it protects them from Dutch elm disease. And so we've got to keep these trees alive. This is one of the oldest trees in the park, over 100 years old. Its winter buds have hairy scales to protect them from the cold. But they're one of the first trees to flower in the spring. And the flowers, you might think, well, they're inconspicuous. They're so tiny. But if you look closely, they're really beautiful. They're pink and green. And here it is flowering. It's just so lacy. And the flowers produce the fruit. And so when you think, oh, it's leafing out, those are not leaves. They're keys. Let me make this a little brighter. They are samaras, which means winged seed. So here's the seed in the middle, and here's the wing around it. And it has covered in tiny little hairs and has a notched edge. That's how you know it's an American elm seed. And the birds love it. So here we have a rose-breasted grosbeak feeding on one, and indigo bunting. And when they fall to the ground, when the samaras fall to the ground, they turn a tannish brown. They dry out, and the seeds are mature then, and a lot of birds come down to eat them, and squirrels. Here's our tree in autumn, and here it is in winter. Oh, what a beautiful place. And then we have a Siberian elm, that large tree in the middle of the heather garden that apparently was a volunteer. Some bird flew over and pooped out the seed, and it grew and grew, and the gardeners didn't take it away. And it's just a centerpiece of the heather garden. And here you have a American goldfinch eating the elm keys are a little rounder than the American elm, feeding on these. And now I want to talk about the oaks, probably the most important trees in the park, because they produce food for so many animals. In the spring, the oak leaves, no matter what kind of oak, especially the native oaks, are the host plant for hundreds and hundreds of native butterflies and moths who lay their eggs on the leaves. And then in the spring, at the same time, the migrating warblers arrive, and they are insectivores, and they eat these caterpillars. And so they're just such important trees. They drop their acorns in the autumn, and that's a source of food for many animals. The one animal that's most responsible for planting oak trees, believe it or not, is the much maligned blue jay, who I adore. Anyway, the blue jay can stuff 6 acorns, 3 in his beak, 3 in his crop. It's very important for the acorns to be transported away from the parent tree, because if there's too much shade underneath, they won't grow. And so that's why it's so important that these animals carry them far away. So here's a grackle feeding on a pin oak acorn, a wood duck eating an acorn, a red-bellied woodpecker eating an acorn. He's picking it off. And I know it's a he, because he's got this red crown all the way from his nape to his bill, flying off with it. Red-breasted nuthatch eating an acorn, the eastern towhee, and the flying squirrel, my new favorite animal. So when we lived on Bennett Avenue, right across the street from the park, I always had a bird feeder outside in the fire escape. And one night, one of my cats was sitting on the windowsill, and his tail was twitching. So I knew something was out there. And I looked out, and there was a tiny squirrel, and this is late at night, eating the seeds. So I put a camera out there, a night cam, And sure enough, it was a flying squirrel. And then more and more flying squirrels came. Let me see if I can show this. Good. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this video about flying squirrel. So here it starts, you can see he's carrying an acorn in his mouth or her mouth. So I could see them flat when they would leave. I could see them gliding back down to the oak across the street at the entrance on Bennett Avenue. And my husband got me this bird feeder that goes inside your window. And at night they would come in and just sit and eat and eat. Once there were 3 of them. There were 2, and then a little one, I assume, was their baby. Oh, I miss them so much fun watching them. And so wonderful that Northern Manhattan, because of all of its parks, have this incredible little animal. So I read that when squirrels pick up an acorn, they'll hold it in their mouth and they'll shake their head. They'll shake the acorn, and what they're feeling for and listening for is the sound of something knocking around inside, which means that there's an acorn weevil inside. If there's an acorn weevil, they will open it up and they will eat it on the spot. If there's nothing in there, then they'll bury it. And it will grow and grow and grow. We have at least 5 different types of oaks in Fort Tryon Park. The red oaks have bristle tips. So we have the pin oak, which is the narrowest blade of all the oaks. We have the northern red oak, the kind you see on the Billings lawn. We have the willow oak, which we see an enormous one on the cafe lawn. We have white oaks throughout, and we have chestnut oaks throughout in the forest and on the path, along the path, walking from the heather garden to the cloisters. So in the spring, these are the male catkins. So this is where the pollen is produced. And these are the female flowers that will produce the acorns. The oak trees are wind pollinated. The flowers appear in early spring, which is when we all start to get allergies. And here's the acorns of the red oak. Oak trees hold on to their leaves throughout winter. They hold on to their dead leaves because it protects their buds. I wanted to talk a little about the Staghorn Sumac, which grows throughout the park. There's one, let me think if I can, just north of the Billings lawn by the heather garden, there is a stand, there's a colony, and they spread vegetatively. So they spread underground through rhizomes, underground stems, and then new shoots come up. And they're clones of the original tree. And so you'll either see all male or all female. If you see this is the fruit, then you know these are female. They're called Staghorn Sumac because they have these really fuzzy stems and they have a compound leaf. And so they look like it looks like the velvet of a male deer. And that's why they're called Staghorn Sumac. And the leaves are just gorgeous in autumn, just blazing red and orange. The fruit is the native tree, and the fruit is very important for the birds. Here's an American robin eating one of the berries. So now let's walk up past the heather garden up into Linden Terrace. And these mostly are little leaf lindens. Tilia cordata, tilia means linden, cordata means heart-shaped. They produce the most wonderful smelling flowers. I mean, when they're flowering, as soon as you come out of the subway, you can smell it no matter where you are in the city, because we have so many flowering linden trees throughout the city. And it's also called the bee tree because bees love it. Native bees and honeybees, carpenter bees, bumblebees. In the fall, the flowers, which are attached to these bracts, fall to the ground. The bracts act like helicopters. And they're eaten by all kinds of birds and squirrels too. So now we're going to move north to the Cloisters Lawn, beautiful Cloisters Lawn. And here is the largest, probably one of the oldest trees in the park, our Ginkgo biloba. It's just a glorious tree. They are also dioecious, so they're either male or female. I think this one is a male. I've never noticed any of those stinky balls that surround the seed. They are a gymnosperm. Let me go a little bit ahead here. And they produce cones, male pollen cones. It's thought that they are a transitional tree between conifers and broadleaf trees or deciduous trees. And they believe that the needles fused, millions of years ago. I mean, this tree is over 150 million years old. It's another living fossil. They believe the needles fused to produce this tree, this type of leaf. So this is the male cone. These are the female cones. They're wind pollinated like all gymnosperms. They all turn yellow at the same time in any given neighborhood in the fall, and then they just drop and they leave this blanket of gold on the ground. They are tough trees. When the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, there was a 1,000-year-old ginkgo tree growing by this temple. Of course, it was destroyed, but the next spring, it sent up shoots. So it can survive in New York City. It can even survive an atom bomb. And this is a 1,400-year-old ginkgo in a Buddhist temple, and you can see people surrounding it. It's a sacred tree in Japan. It's a magnificent tree. And here are those. They're not really fruit, because fruit is a mature ovary that contains the seeds. And this is not a flowering plant. It's a gymnosperm. And so animals today don't eat this. This lived so long ago. The animals that were alive that ate it then are no longer, they're extinct. But humans love the seeds. Ginkgo means silver apricot. And if you remove that stinky flesh from around the seed and then you bake the seeds, they're supposed to be delicious. I've never tasted them. I just want to point out that due east of the ginkgo is a massive American elm. It's as big as if not bigger than the elm in the Heather Garden. And I don't know if this is one of the trees that John D. Rockefeller Jr. had the Olmsted brothers save and move when he created the park in starting in 1918.
It's likely, Leslie, because it's definitely older than the park. So 180 trees throughout the land he acquired were then transplanted throughout Fort Tryon. So our guess is this was one from one of the former estates.
Yeah, I mean, it's just magnificent. I love this tree. So on the Cloisters Lawn, you'll also see this hackberry. It has 3 trunks. The hackberry's bark is really distinctive. It's covered in these warts and bumps and ridges. There's one in the lower part. Well, there are a couple in the lower part too. And it's also the host tree, the host plant for many butterflies and moths and for these gall-making wasps. So here's just a few of the butterflies that use the hackberry to lay their eggs on. So the tawny emperor, the question mark, the hackberry emperor, and the morning cloak. And these are the berries, and the birds love the berries. So it's a very important tree to wildlife. And so you have the mockingbird and the robin, cedar waxwing, and then you have the animals that come there in the spring, the warblers, that eat the caterpillars from all those butterflies and moths that lay their eggs on. In the corner in the northwest corner of the Cloisters Lawn is a beautiful river birch tree with exfoliating bark that's very important, and it produces these cones, and the birds, and this is a flowering plant, but it produces these cones. The birds love the seeds, but it is also a place where overwintering insects can stay safe, tucked under the bark, including the mourning cloak. The mourning cloak overwinters as an adult, which is very unusual. And then it'll come out as one of the first butterflies we see in the early spring. And now let's go to the cafe lawn, which has many specimen trees. So here we see the weeping beech. We see a cultivar of a horse chestnut. There is a bald cypress here, magnolia. Here's that willow oak. And the beautiful copper beech. My God, this is me. My husband took this some years ago. And look at the size of it. It is so beautiful. So beech trees have very thin bark that stretches as the tree grows. It's about the only bark you can actually carve in. And, you know, lovers carve their initials in it. And there was a Roman saying, as this tree grows, so may our love, because as the tree grows, the lover's initials get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we have the weeping beech, the beautiful weeping beech, an amazing tree. Here it is in spring. Right across from the cafe lawn is a gorgeous Eastern redbud. Here are the beautiful flowers. And the flowers are edible. I didn't want to put this up, but there was a picture of a little boy eating the flowers. Of course, nobody should eat anything from a tree unless you're with an expert. But the birds love to eat it. So here is a male cardinal eating the buds. And I saw this in the lower park where there are lots of Eastern redbuds. I saw a cardinal eating the buds. I couldn't believe it. All right, the lower park, we have some beautiful sweet gum trees. The leaves are star-shaped. They have male and female flowers on the same tree, so that's called monoecious. The flowers that are hanging down are the female flowers that will form the seed ball, and the male flowers fall down after the female flowers are fertilized, and this is what they look like. This is the seed ball before it's mature. Once it's mature and ready to disperse its seeds, and oh, the leaves are so magnificent in autumn. And so these are the things we, trip on and sprain our ankles on, but there's lots of little beaks that open up. Each little area is like a beak that opens up, and there's a few tiny little seeds inside that birds with small beaks, like house sparrows and finches, will feed on. Why is it doing that? Oh, okay, so the American goldfinch, the first one was a male in breeding plumage, bright yellow, and here he is in the winter when he uses his gorgeous color, because he's not going to mate in the winter. So he's very well camouflaged, and he's feeding on the seeds of the sweet gum tree. Tulip trees down the lower park. There's one on each side of this path that goes up eventually to the dog run. They are our tallest deciduous trees. The native people made dugout canoes from them because they're tall and straight. And they produce beautiful flowers. They have an unusual leaf with this notch at the tip. And this is the ovary of the flower that produces these seed pods. And they are also samaras. The seed is here, and here's the wing, and birds eat them. Here's a little cardinal eating one. And then we have an American beech down in the lower park. Here it is with its initials. It has male and female flowers on the same tree, and it produces beech nuts that are eaten by many birds, including the tufted titmouse here. The serviceberry tree, this is a view from my window, my former window, looking at the hillside at the serviceberry trees. They're called serviceberry because when they bloomed, that told people that the ground had thawed and they could bury their dead. So people would look to the hillside to see if they could see the white flowers, and that they knew then that they could have a service for their loved ones. There's a very large one, let me just, on this lawn in the lower park. Here's a lady with her dog sitting underneath the shade. The flowers are pollinated by bees and lots of native bees too. We have hundreds of species of native bees, and they love the hackberry flower, and also it's the host plant for the tiger swallowtail butterfly, which is very common in our area. And the berries are edible for us and birds. Very, very sweet. I don't eat them because I want to leave them for the birds. Here's a song sparrow, but look, 35 species of birds feed on these berries. Mockingbirds, robins, catbirds, orioles, grosbeaks, thrushes, chickadees, and goldfinches, and more. Here it is in fall. The leaves are beautiful in fall. It's just a wonderful tree. It's also called shadblow because when they bloom, it's the time that the American shad, our native, one of our native fish, returns from the ocean up estuary, so up the Hudson River, to spawn. And so it's called shadblow. It's also called Juneberry because the berries form in June. I'm going to end with the blue Atlas cedar. There are 3 beautiful cedars just south of Ann Loftus Playground, right on that corner, the northern edge of the park. These are native to the Atlas Mountains in Africa and Morocco, and they produce male and female cones. They're wind pollinated. Because they're from Africa, they're, I would say they're just an ornamental tree in our area. But boy, are they beautiful. And this is a gorgeous picture taken by Jennifer. The trees just glow. The park just glows in the autumn. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to open it up to questions. If you want to raise your hand, or if you're not comfortable speaking on camera, you can do it in the chat. I've got one question I'll throw out. I know it's not a tree, but phenomenal. That was so wonderful. Loved this. Okay, so someone says the serviceberry in the lower park and the copper beech up top were both damaged. Now my chat feature isn't working. I didn't know about the serviceberry being damaged. I do know about the copper beech. I guess some people over carved, and then the woodpeckers have had a field day. So we've worked with the Parks Department's Forestry Division. You may have seen we've tried to sort of wrap the tree to protect it so people don't continue to carve it. And then we're going to see if Parks Department's Forestry Division has something that they can use to sort of seal the tree so it doesn't become susceptible to disease. I'm not an arborist and I don't play one on TV, but I do collaborate with the Parks Department's Forestry Division. If they can't help us, the Fort Tryon Trust does hire Olmsted Tree Care. That's who we use for inoculating our 4 dozen historic American elms from Dutch elm disease. And they'll probably be able to prescribe something to protect that copper beech, because it's quite sad. It's heartbreaking that it has that huge wound on it. But if you want to email me more details about the serviceberry, I'd love I'd love to hear more about that so we can get forestry on it, and if not them, our private contractors. Loved this, was so wonderful. I know it's not a tree, but anything you would say about the Japanese paper tree is a question or comment that came up, Leslie.
I'm not sure. I mean, there is a Chinese paper bark tree in the park that blooms now. I'm not sure what you mean by if it's not a tree, what is it? I don't know what it is. Maybe you could get the scientific name and put it in, and I can look it up.
I'm going to try to make the chat.
Okay, so there's a question. I'll read one too. What
Okay.
is the function of the burlap in the heather garden during the winter months? So John puts that up to block sensitive plants from the winds coming up off the Hudson. And that's right.
We've
Right.
gotten, yes, we get winter burn on some of the heats and heathers, and we've lost them in past years. So this is to block that. And our horticulture staff and some of our heather garden volunteers have been invaluable in protecting more of the plants, so lesser loss.
And I see Edgeworthia was written in. So that is the Chinese paper bark tree. And it's, it's a small tree. So maybe that's what you were thinking, that it's more like a shrub. So that's I didn't include in this talk, but it should be flowering now. And the flowers hang down, and their flower heads are inflorescence containing many small flowers, and they hang down. So the snow sits on top. They're pollinated by winter moths and winter crane flies. They're beautiful trees, and Japanese, Chinese, Korean, in those countries, they make paper out of the bark.
Someone asked if this recording will be available. Yes, we'll put it up on the Fort Tryon Park Trust website. I'll add a link. There's a whole page actually of virtual resources. You go on forttryonparktrust.org, recurring walks and talks. We've got past mushroom talks, Leslie's tree talk, heather garden walks. So I'll throw that in the chat. Someone asked if there's lots of damage from the recent ice. Not that I've witnessed or has been reported to me, but I did a walk through Saturday morning and almost fell multiple times. But I think as the days go on, we'll see. Yes, in the intro, I did mention a tree coloring book. The Fort Tryon Park Trust and the Green Acre Foundation are collaborating with Leslie Day and
Trudy Smoke.
And coloring is therapeutic and for adults, but also a wonderful vehicle for educating kids. So ours will be dual purpose, and we'll show the different trees and then the birds that rely on them and vice versa, sort of the interdependence. Someone asked for us to elaborate on the elms. The elms are, they're prone to something called Dutch elm disease. And so biannually, every other year, the Fort Tryon Park Trust has a Save the Elms campaign. We need to raise $50,000. And essentially it's somewhat similar to vaccination. Olmsted Tree Care comes in. They use a solution that gets sucked into the sort of the arteries of the tree and go up into it, and it helps stave off Dutch elm disease. Dutch elm disease is, I guess, it's a beetle type of disease, I think.
A beetle carries the fungus in its saliva.
So once you have it in one tree, because if anybody's read that book about the social life of trees, once you've done it to one tree, it can very readily spread to the rest of the nearby stand of American elms. So we feel like it's critical to preserve our trees and protect them, because some of them are over 100 years and the canopy is just incredible. And it would take over 100 years to recapture that, which would be heartbreaking. Someone asked about the tower. Have you seen a trend in differing tree growth in the park with the addition of higher rise buildings along the park? Not yet. Some of you may have heard the bad news. Sherman Plaza at 4650 Broadway didn't get included in the inward rezoning, so we don't have the R7-2 or R7A. Sally Fisher's on this call. She'll correct me if I'm wrong. And unfortunately, if you're creative, you can, as of right, build a 20-story tower next to Fort Tryon Park, which is what is happening. But now I'm told that the former city planning chair under the de Blasio administration also gave a 4-story bonus because there are allegedly not enough grocery stores nearby. But we have 4 within that area. But so we are going to have a 24-story building. It will be what you now see when you're on the Linden Terrace and the flagpole area. When you're down at ground level, it will be towering over Broadway and Sherman in the lower park along the Broadway Promenade. And unfortunately, there are multiple development sites along that stretch from Dykeman Street down past Bennett Avenue. I won't say too much, but you can write the new city planning chair, Dan Gorodnik, who most recently was the chair, the head of the Riverside Park Conservancy. So he's someone who has a deep appreciation for the value of parks. You can write him and ask him to reverse that fresh bonus for 4650 Broadway. I'll put more information in the chat, but it's really quite devastating. And we'll definitely change the character of the park. The Fort Tryon Trust was successful in working with the elected officials on getting at least along the northern border of the park some level of protection, but we weren't successful on the eastern side, which is really upsetting. I'm going to see if I can find this.
And while you're doing that, Glinda asked about the golden rain tree. And there are a few in the park, and they produce beautiful yellow flowers in the spring. And there's 2, I think, right? Is it at the corner of Sherman and Broadway? You can see in the autumn, the flowers produce these little lantern-like fruit, seed pod. They're just like little brown hanging lanterns. They're beautiful. And then Beth, what is the plant that produces the fabulous purple berries? That's beautyberry. That's a shrub that has very small purple flowers in the spring, late spring, and produces those amethyst colored berries that the birds love in the winter.
What's the story? Beth asks, what's the story with the tree that was cut down a year or so ago next to one of the benches on Linden Terrace? Oh, so that was a linden. We had a I don't know if people remember, we had a lightning strike. And one of the trees closest to the water was struck and got to a point where it was destabilized and had to be removed. We have another one when we had Emerald Tree Care doing work around the Abbey's lawn earlier this year. They saw another tree has a split. Parks Forestry thinks we can get a few more years out of it, so is not having it removed. Since the long-term goal obviously is to replace any lost trees, but since Linden Terrace is going to need some reconstruction, if you see on the lower level, the tree roots have sort of made the surface quite bumpy. We want to wait till after the construction, because young trees would probably be more vulnerable to heavy machinery and everything else. And if you hurt a tree or affect a tree or have to remove a tree, it increases your construction costs, because the city has a pretty stringent tree protection regulations, which is a good thing, but that's not good if you don't have a lot of money for making repairs or capital reconstruction. So Linden Terrace is not currently funded for reconstruction. That's something that we will be pursuing capital funding from our new elected officials for, though, in the future, because it definitely needs it, at least the lower level. And what they would do to protect the trees probably is elevate it so that the roots have the space that they need to spread out. But we're not making a trip hazard for the public.
There's a bunch of flying squirrel questions. I don't know how many we have. You know, most people don't see them because they're active at night. But where I lived in Fort Tryon Gardens, there was a colony of them. I mean, people could see them walking their dogs at night on Bennett Avenue and on Broadway. I don't know how many, but there are a lot. And then they don't fly during the day. They start at dusk. And then someone wrote, Kristen, some flying squirrels fluoresce on their bellies to disguise themselves as a predator. Somehow I had no idea. Now I have to look that up. Fantastic. I would love to have seen that. Oh.
So do you have, Leslie, do you have a favorite tree in the park?
Oh, I don't know. It's changing all the time. I mean, of course, the elm, the ginkgo, the dawn redwood. I mean, with the dawn redwood, we didn't really notice it. The gardeners didn't notice it so much until I think it was a linden in front of it fell over. And when they removed it, we were like, oh, look at that tree. And, you know, it has such an interesting history. And that, you know, star magnolia. I don't know. I don't have one favorite. Love them all. Well, thank you so much.
Sure. Similar to the New York City tree inventory, is there an inventory of local fungi? So if you go on the Fort Tryon Trust website, there's a whole PowerPoint on fungi, and Paul Sadowski, who worked for the Fort Tryon Park Trust, has an inventory within that. He only spoke about about 100 that are in Wood Hill Park, but apparently there are 300. I'm not sure we have that many in Fort Tryon, but I would imagine they're roughly similar. Inwood is obviously more woodland than Fort Tryon, but and then you can always check iNaturalist. And not iNaturalist, I guess, is for the species. I'm going to see if I can just, since someone brought it up. Can you stop sharing your screen for a second, Leslie?
Yep. Oh, there's everybody.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. Since it's so upsetting. Can you see that?
What? Oh, ooh. That's what it's going to look like, huh?
That's one rendering. The designer is actually an excellent designer, Gary Handel, but this was a rendering that the Fort Tryon Park Trust had someone do back in 2016 when something was proposed. And of course, I think about the birds, if there is going to be lots of glass. And this is what you'll see from the Cloisters Lawn. You'll suddenly start to see buildings. And this is 4650 Broadway and the other development sites. And this is what you'll see from Linden Terrace. So it will have a dramatic impact on the park and likely on the trees that are at least the ones on the Broadway side. And I would imagine the birds as well. So right to Dan Gorodnik, the chair of the City Planning Commission.
And the new Parks Commissioner too, right?
Yes, our new Parks Commissioner is wonderful. Sue Donahue. She's a friend from when she worked at the Parks Department before. She was the Assistant Commissioner who led the Plan YC initiative. And I guess for about the last 8 years, she's been heading the Prospect Park Alliance. So she also knows the importance of the private partner for filling in funding gaps. So we're very, very excited to have her at the helm. And then Iris Rodriguez Rosa, who's currently the Bronx Commissioner, will serve as the Parks Department's first Deputy Commissioner. Liam Kavanaugh will be stepping down. Lastly, people, I want to see if I've got the URL I told people is correct. Yes. Okay. So on the recurring walks and talks, here we go. This, I'm putting the link as to where Leslie's talk from today will be, as well as the mushroom talk and some of our other virtual resources. Are we missing any other questions, Leslie?
Yes, Florence, are Zelkova trees related to elms? Are they resistant to the disease? They are elms. Zelkovas are elms. I'm not sure if they're resistant. If they're resistant to Dutch elm disease, I'm not sure.
Kolodnik info. I'm not sure what that means. Kolodnik info?
Oh, the new Dan Gorodnik.
Oh, Gorodnik. Oh,
yeah.
Sure. Let's see if city planning has updated their website. Can you see my screen? Or no?
No.
Okay. Doesn't have his email up yet.
It's was it Gorodnik?
Gorodnik.
Like that? And
he was formerly a city council member. You can always tweet at him at Dan Gorodnik. And he's lovely, and I would imagine he'd be sympathetic. He is chair of the City Planning Commission, recently appointed by Mayor Adams. So many praises for your talk, Leslie. You're such truly a gift to all of us.
Thank
you for deepening our appreciation of our amazing trees in Fort Tryon. And everyone be on the lookout for ways you can help preserve our trees, because as we know, they clean our air, they minister to us psychologically, their habitat and food for birds and beasts. They provide needed shade. So they truly are the lungs of the city. We'd hate to lose any more. Thank you, Leslie. Any other last questions, resources, ideas? I love the sweet gum ball suggestion. we should collect them and use them for making Christmas tree ornaments for kids. Um, that's great. All right. Well, thank you all. And if you want to find out more about upcoming programs, forttryonparktrust.org. Or on, if you don't want any more emails or you don't want to look at a website, you can find us on Facebook, everybody's favorite. Great. I don't think we missed anything, but if you have if any other questions come to mind, you can email me at info@forttryonparktrust.org and I'll shoot it off to Leslie, and she's so knowledgeable. I'm sure she'll get an answer in no time. So thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your time with us this afternoon. I hope you get out in the park and enjoy these trees. We do another tree resource. We have wonderful 2-minute for trees videos that Leslie did. And not only are they educational, you can find them on the Fort Tryon Trust website and our YouTube channel, but they're like meditations because Leslie is just so calming and so soothing. It's like this wonderful
the music is beautiful, and the way Yvette moved the camera so slowly over the trees.
We hired a local video producer, but they're really wonderful. 2 minutes for trees, and they're just like a mini vacation. They're so wonderful. So check those out if you want a little dose of Leslie and Fort Tryon's trees. So thanks everyone for coming. And
we don't even need music. We just need Leslie's voice. I can't wait to listen to this again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's so kind.
All right. Thank you so much, Leslie. We really are so grateful for you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care, everyone.